This week on Hacking TV, Twitter is on the block. But what if all the big money steps away? Is it doomed?
And an update on the Yahoo Verizon deal. Is a massive haircut in the making?
Then, a look at podcast darling Gimlet Media. Paranoia or promise on the horizon?
And Roku gets more open.
All that plus some news about us. I'm Steve Rosenbaum.
And I'm Saul Hansel.
And this is Hacking TV. And off we go. We're preparing to hack. So, Yahoo. So before we began the podcast, you said, what does Yahoo have to do with video? And I think it's a fair question. I mean,
Twitter or Yahoo?
I'm sorry, Twitter. Twitter has wanted to be in the video business. They've taken a bunch of swings at it, and now they're for sale. But without much drama, most of the serious players just said, yeah, we're not in. I'm surprised by that.
Why is that? Would you have paid $20 billion out of your pocket if you had $20 billion in your pocket for Twitter? Could you have made that into $30 or $40 billion?
You know, I think the question isn't, is it a good investment that's going to make money? I think the question is, you know, how powerful is Twitter as a aggregator and creator of conversation, and who wants to own that mechanism to manage conversation? Or is it just too broken and unfixable?
Why? Well, so I'm going to challenge this only in that I think that Twitter is an amazing company that's created enormous value for its users. But there are some companies where when they create value for their customers, also create value for themselves. I would argue that Twitter from the very beginning gave away or created so much more of the value for users than it did for itself that the people who were running it made a bunch of mistakes.
When they cut off developer access to the API, I think history will write that it will go down as one of the great criminally negligent moves in technology.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, so Twitter started as this thing that was incredibly open, built on standards, SMS standards, API standards, and it was not the thing, but the switchboard for the thing. Twitter is less Facebook and more the DNS, the little index that gets you look up your web browser looks up how to find a web page. And just like ICANN is a nonprofit body, I would argue that Twitter either needed to be nonprofit, or the best model for Twitter is Craigslist. For profit, but small. And just like the cash-on-cash return to Craig Newmark is enormous, one of the great investments of all time, I think if the people who started Twitter didn't pretend that they were something else, they would have had a great investment, and users would love them infinitely more than they do now.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think so. Who if you could pick anyone to buy Twitter, I have an outsider darling buyer. Maybe you have one as well.
Well, it depends. Do you want a deal that is economical? So Twitter is at the moment in the market with the stock price down a little bit after these rumors fell off, is worth $11 billion, right? Which is infinite times its profits, because it makes it has $2.2 billion of revenue and loses $500 million a year. The only buyer I could think of that could afford that and have it make sense is Google. And Google should do it and treat it like all their other nonprofit stuff, which they're doing a lot less of. And
Google said no. They said they're not in.
I know that. I mean, the other people who should buy it is Mozilla, but they have to have it donated to them.
So I think the buyer should be Facebook.
Why?
Because there is no tech company that's trying to balance the hey, we're an algorithm, we're objective, we're just the tech guys, with we're an editorial, we want to actually have a role, we want to have a voice. They're struggling to figure out this complexity between code and content, and I think that someone that owns Twitter needs to be willing to solve that problem.
I think you are right in that the Facebook management team is probably in the best position to handle that, but the business distraction of the fake antitrust discussion, and the potential. I mean, there is a real. I mean, it's not really competitive because on the average day, Twitter's 300 million users spend less than 1 minute a day on Twitter, and Facebook's 1.5 billion users spend 50 minutes a day on Facebook. So Facebook is making an experience that they can monetize. Twitter is making an index to experiences that the creators of those experiences monetize. It's a different thing. It's more like a search engine. It's less like a media company. And they want to be a media company, and they have screwed it up because they're losing the Twitteriness of Twitter.
So as we've learned, like, there's no way it goes away, right? There's no way they just shut off the lights.
No way. You can say there's no way the AOL goes away, but the AOL service is, for all intents and purposes, gone away. Lots of things go away. eBay is a much smaller force in commerce than it was 10 years ago. I mean, a 10-year time horizon. And in social networks, I mean, MySpace, which was a dominant force on the internet 10 or 12 years ago, doesn't exist.
So the nightmare scenario is Twitter gets bought by some weird private equity amalgam of weird cash, and they just squeak the thing into something. They put a ton of ads in it and put all kinds of filters on it and just make it.
If I had a private equity firm, there's a price at which I would buy it and do the following things. Twitter right now, I just looked this up, has, I think it's like 4,000 employees, and or some enormous number of employees that they don't need. They've got $2 billion of revenue. If you fire 3/4 of the employees, keep the core business, sell some ads, you can make $1 billion a year, even if the revenue never goes up. And you don't think your business is about growth. You think of it as cash on cash return. You could get $1 billion a year for a good long time from that. So there's a price probably less than the $11 billion it's selling for, but $5 billion
if you're the buyer, do you keep Jack?
No. I might see if Ev has something to say, but what has Jack done that has made sense for users or for shareholders? Yeah. Would you like to answer that question?
No, again, and then there is just because
you should answer. If you own Twitter, would you keep Jack?
For nostalgia's sake.
Executive or like non-executive chairman.
But by the way,
there's so many Twitter founders. You can get a Twitter founder on any Starbucks in San Francisco and put them in charge.
But we are in the political season, so let's give ourselves the generosity to go here for a minute. You could argue that Twitter's openness and lack of focus or lack of editorial standards, call it whatever you will, effectively created Donald Trump.
Twitter has created enormous value for its users, including, unfortunately, Donald Trump. There isn't any money. I mean, do you want to buy the exclusive ad on Donald Trump's Twitter page were they to sell it?
That would be a no. Thank you very much.
Okay. So, good for Donald, neutral for Twitter Inc.
All right. So moving on. We had a bet last week as to whether or not the fallout from Yahoo would result in the deal not going through, and I think I'm going to lose this bet.
So the latest story is that the Verizon executive sent Tim Armstrong to California to ask for $1 billion off of the price. And not surprisingly, Yahoo said, we have a contract, a deal is a deal. We want our $5 billion, please. And we'll see who is tougher.
You know, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. You start adding it up, it's real money.
Here's the right deal. The right deal is you put $1 billion in of the acquisition price into a reserve, and you use that to pay any real claims that come from all this crap, because you can legitimately argue that they probably should have told you this, or and then anything that's not a real claim goes to the Yahoo shareholders, and anything over $1 billion Verizon pays. That's the fair way of doing it. I wouldn't be surprised if they work it out that way, because I don't think there's $1 billion of liability. I don't think there's $100 million of liability in this. So there's no reason, there's no natural reason to reduce the price by that. But it's uncertain. We don't know. The Clinton administration's new FTC chair might be, out of the Elizabeth Warren school of capitalism and might go after Yahoo for something. So, I see the uncertainty. Anyway, I am looking forward to my $10.
Yeah. I've reserved it. I've got it reserved.
All right. Story number 2, one close to both of our hearts: podcasting.
Indeed. So as podcasters, I can only tell you that my media consumption behavior in the last year and a half has changed so dramatically. Every day I get up, every day my pod feed is filled with 25 new podcasts that I follow. And if I either am not interested in a couple or skip a couple, and the ones that I really enjoyed aren't refreshed as promptly as I'd like, it bums me out.
And I have got to say, certainly as we've gotten into the election season, I've always been a podcast fan, but I'm spending more time even on podcasts. So great medium, ? Business, right? So there's some, the new season of Startup is out, and they're shining the spotlight on the company that Alex Blumberg founded to make NPR-style podcasts. And it's not like money is pouring out of the faucets.
Fundamentally, here's the thing that I think they're now coming to terms with. They're building a business on, I don't want to say quicksand exactly, but, a hit-driven business. They're selling sponsorships on individual podcasts. So as opposed to, say, CNN, where if one show does well, another show does well, you swap them out, you move them around, but you're selling the network. What Gimlet is doing is selling each individual show. So what they, in the premiere episode of Startup, what the CFO says to Alex in a fairly open kimono way is, look, we've spent all this money hiring up to 60 people so that we can build this collection of hit podcasts, and we don't know until they launch that they're going to be successful and that they're not going to some extent, cannibalize each other. And that is, and unlike advertising where someone says, oh, I want to come in and buy Gimlet, and if you get more inventory, then I get more inventory. What's happening is advertisers are saying, it's great you've got this new science show. I'm going to wait and listen to it. Then I'm going to look at the numbers. Then I'm going to make sure people like it, and then I'll buy a sponsorship.
Yeah, I think that you're right about the hit-driven nature. I think that it's not a sales problem in that if they had a dozen shows with 1 million users a week, they would sell that. I think that one thing that podcasting has developed that text digital media doesn't have is a very compelling advertising medium, because the podcast format, which has this sort of old-fashioned radio-style sponsorships, where I, as the podcast host, hold up my MeUndies underwear or whatever it is, or talk about how comfortable it is. For direct response businesses, for certain other businesses, that seems to be effective. I think the problem with Gimlet, who I love, is the cost side. They're saying they want to be like the HBO, but they don't have the subscription revenue. Everything they do is expensive to make, right? Our podcast, as our user, our viewer can tell, is cheap, right? We're using webcams, and we're just talking to each other. We aren't editing. You're editing some, but basically we don't edit. We don't go anywhere. Gimlet goes places, records vast quantities of tape that they only can use some of, and it is a very different style, which is great, but it's expensive, right?
So they had some internal drama. We only have a glimpse into what it is. They had their first kind of fallout, and we can read some tea leaves and guess a little bit what we think happened. It's interesting, right? Because Mystery Show was a hit podcast. It was rated the #1 podcast of the year by iTunes, or the newest hit or something. It had some big, and Gimlet canceled it. And no one's saying exactly why.
There's also so Mystery Show, did it hit the right numbers to cover the cost? It was another NPR style show with a Planet Money, or with a This American Life person doing it. I think it's interesting to compare Gimlet to Panoply. Panoply comes out of Slate and now has dozens of podcasts, and they've got a mix of podcasts. A lot of them are like sort of the classic Slate podcast, the Political Gabfest, which is a lot closer to ours, where you just sit around and talk, cheap. But they're bringing on content from all kinds of partners, including MTV, and they have a mix of stuff, and so diversification helps them, cross promotion helps them.
But if you read between the lines on the Mystery Show thing, part of what I find interesting about it is kind of buried in the text of what Alex said and what Starlee Kine said is like, I also think they're getting their first glimpse of the complexity of dealing with talent.
Yeah, so absolutely. But if you were going to look at Alex's business plan and how the direction they were going, you say, what are the things that are going to happen at some point over the next couple of years? You're going to say some of your shows are not going to be hits. Some of this talent-heavy, expense-heavy model is not going to pan out. That's, I listened religiously to the first season and kept sort of shouting at it, you're missing the economics of this. You're and I'm a huge fan. I love what they stand for, but the other thing is, this is the political season. If you look at the top shows on the iTunes charts, guess what? It's about the election, because we have the craziest election on the planet, and they made a choice not to have an entry into a very crowded category. And they might say, well, what value can we add? And the answer is, I'll bet you could think of something, and that's a way of being in the conversation when in a season when maybe people don't want to think as much about mysteries other than how is Donald Trump going to burn himself aflame today.
But the other thing we talked about this is so for me, I was not listening to I wasn't watching any of the cable television shows about politics. I didn't, at the end of the day, when I've had a long day at work and I've got things to do, the idea of coming home and watching a half-hour you know, MSNBC show about politics just wasn't where I was going. But I do listen to them on podcasts. And interestingly enough, at least for the time being, they've edited all of the television commercials out of the podcast feeds. They're unsponsored.
Right, they've been those things. The CNN,
like Rachel Maddow.
Yeah, has been on forever, and they haven't taken it seriously. They haven't turned it off, but they haven't invested in it. Most of the podcasts that are getting attention right now are audio, but I think that there's something to be said, right, for a video series on demand. It's what essentially Netflix is. I think that you're seeing a lot of creativity. Audible is doing a bunch of original productions in a podcasty sort of way. I just noticed on iTunes something I've been wanting, which is some company is hiring human people to read various text publications. Because sometimes, I mean, I've been having Siri read me certain things, like long magazine articles that I want to listen to. I mean, I think it's a fabulous format, but, you know, I'll tell you what it's done. It has ruined radio for me. If I'm in the car and I'm listening to NPR, which I like to do, I constantly want to hit the forward button. If there's a story that annoys me, I mean, you know, and a cousin of podcasting is like the NPR app, which is news stories and podcasts all jumbled together. But I want to be able to say, this bores me, skip ahead to the next thing. And radio doesn't do that yet.
So one of the things I promised at the top of the show was that we'd talk a little bit about our podcasting, and we have some news. So I thought I'd just kind of rattle off for our listeners how many different places you can currently get either the video podcast or the audio podcast. So we're available on iTunes, both video and audio. We're available on YouTube video. We're available on Facebook video. We're available on Huffington Post for video. And as of last week, we're now available on Amazon Prime. And that took a little bit of figuring out some new tech and getting it transcribed and getting the transcription attached to the video. But we're now seeing, you know, an interesting kind of diverse listenership that cumes up to be, you know, certainly thousands of listeners and viewers a week now. And that's very different than it was even, you know, 6 months ago.
And just explain to me and everybody else, what does it mean to put a podcast on Amazon Prime? Because it's not something I've never connected to a podcast on Amazon Prime.
So Amazon has a product called Amazon Video Direct. It's unlike YouTube or some other services. It has some very specific requirements about file size and graphic design and graphic elements and SRT files for audio, and it all needs to like be exactly what Amazon's expecting. And then it gives you a bunch of choices about where you want to distribute and whether or not. And so, in fact, you can get this video podcast free with Amazon Prime, or you can download it for $1.99 in standard definition, or you can download it in HD for $2.99, or you can get a season for $7.99.
How many shows do we have in a season?
That's a good question. We as of now we have one show in a season because we didn't do any of the back catalog. But they want very big file uploads, and it took, I don't know, maybe it'll get quicker. It took the first time that I uploaded it. The word Hacking TV was on our background graphic, and they rejected it and said that they couldn't have a permanent graphic on the screen. And so last week we republished the episode without the Hacking TV words on the screen. And, you know, as with all things that are technologically driven, they don't exactly tell you what's going to get approved until it gets approved. But because of the size of the file, and it was about a 45-minute upload, it took almost a day and a half before it got approved. So
we will see. And can I subscribe? Will it notify me once I subscribe that the next one is out?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I do not know I guess it will. Yes. Okay. I would say it would.
I assume almost all of our users have Amazon Prime subscriptions. If you love us, watch us the next issue on Amazon Prime, and we will get 17 cents. And you can tell us what you think.
Yep.
Which of these is your favorite platform? You also missed, we have our own website, hackingtv.news, which
Yep.
has video and audio. There's an RSS feed, so any old podcast reader can subscribe to the video or the audio. We are, distributing everywhere.
Indeed we are.
What do you think our most popular channel is as of now before the rush of Amazon Prime subscribers?
1 second, I've got noise in the background. I would say our largest audience is probably Huffington Post. And that's because they have an existing visitor base that comes to their homepage. People see that the new show is out, they click on it, they watch. We don't get full half-hour views. Sometimes we get 25% is our mean. Sometimes we go up to 50. But I think that iTunes gets complete listens as opposed to video.
I would love the technology. This is one of my frustrations with podcast technology, is chapterized so that you can push that skip button.
Yep.
And move from this boring segment to that really fascinating one that for some reason we put at the end of the show.
Which brings us
to the really fascinating one at the end of the show.
To the really fascinating one at the end of the show. So Roku. Roku had a bunch of news. So Roku is now hardwired into the new Hitachi TVs. I have mixed feelings about any piece of technology being hardwired into a flat screen, but good for them for getting that deal done.
Good to a point. I mean, I went to look up Hitachi's market share, and it's so small that it doesn't even show up. But and I have a fondness for Hitachi because the first tube television I ever owned was a Hitachi I bought from Crazy Eddie's. But what Roku has done is they have locked up the Chinese market. TCL, which bought the old RCA brand, which was big. The Chinese makers collectively have 25% of the market, and most of them put Roku in their sets. So that's good distribution for them.
So what do you make of this new, anyone can launch a video channel on Roku without writing code? I
think Roku has long been the most open of the platforms. Long before Apple opened up and all these others, they're making it easier yet, but if you had an RSS feed, it wasn't that hard to make an app. If you didn't already have your own built-in audience, they weren't going to help you promote it a hell of a lot. I mean, their app stores, whatever it is. But so I think it's necessary when the Chrome or the Google and the Apple app stores are pretty open now. But
well, I'm gonna instruct our crack tech team to explore Roku Direct Publisher platform in their spare time and see if we can add yet another source of a couple hundred viewers, because we could cum together what could be a mighty audience, and that would be great.
It is what we need to do. I mean, the question is Roku, in a world where the competition is so integrated, you have the Amazon Fire Echo axis, the Google everything in their Google Home and so on axis, and you've got the Apple everything axis. All of them have app stores. All of them have products that are phones and tablets and whatever the hell Echo is. I just worry, as much as I like them, that the world is passing them by, and they have always, and their biggest claim to fame, which was they had stripped down things that were cheaper than everybody else, even though they were lower tech in many ways, isn't so relevant anymore. Everybody's got a $39 stick, except for Apple, which doesn't believe it. But
why doesn't Apple have a stick? That's a good question. Anyway, we've run the clock.
They lowered the price from the $3 to $69. Apple never wants to be at the bottom of the market.
True enough. An excellent half hour.
Always.
Enjoy this week in what promises to be fractious and entertaining politics. And we will reconvene next week with another episode of Hacking TV.
All right. To everybody, keep on hacking.
Keep on hacking.